I think one of the most substantial takeaways from art in the modern age is that we all have higher expectations than ever for multiple different reasons. The main reason that this is how this works is because we develop an understanding more of how things work the more we do them. I don't and can't get exact numbers, but I would bet, even if I'm not so good at making bets, that the amount of people who finish the first Legend of Zelda game compared to the sales of the game are at a lower percentage compared to most Zelda games that came out after, one being Tears of the Kingdom. So to make it more interesting, a better question would be, what's the ratio of sales versus main story completions in Tears of the Kingdom compared to Breath of the Wild? That we can never know or have a widely agreed answer to, not only because the numbers of what I'm asking right now is impossible to see or figure out, but also because both games are so close in terms of which is superior. The argument on which game is better is technically a subjective one, so there's no real need to pride yourself with thinking that you're right on which one you think is better. But arguments can still be made in a sense, as most of us operate on a similar basis for not just what makes a good video game, but what would specifically make a good Zelda game. For example, if a Zelda game didn't have upbeat music themes for the bosses you fight after completing a dungeon, a lot of us would criticize that as a missing defining characteristic of a Zelda game, as small as that is, as most games in the franchise are known for having a great score. I know this because in Breath of the Wild, a lot of people criticized the theme while exploring Hyrule because it was boring, not upbeat, or slow. I personally liked it, but when it comes to Zelda, that complaint does have a right to be made. In this video, I'm going to be defending why I think Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is a better game than what YouTube may say, and I'll use the basis I just described to make those arguments. It should be obvious, but I will mention just so I could say that I said it, I'm not defending every aspect of this game in this video, and it's not a perfect game. I could also be wrong about everything I'm saying. There are still tons of valid arguments you could make after watching this video, and nothing I'm saying in this video will be an assertion. The point is to refute popular negative takes on this game online that may bring your opinion down to a level that it doesn't need to be. Calling Tears of the Kingdom a glorified DLC, which I've heard a lot more than you may think, as I've talked about this with a bunch of different people, is in of itself more of sloganeering than making an argument in the first place if the terms aren't defended. And this is just a tip for argumentation. If someone is sloganeering or saying something that sounds good but doesn't have any substance to the actual argument, you can point that out and why what they're saying is practically useless. What someone means, or what they think they mean when they say this game is a glorified DLC, is that it's just a DLC presented as a whole game. So it's kind of like a pseudo video game. Maybe because of a revamped map, similar mechanics, or whatever else. The idea that it's an accurate description is completely false though, and it'd be fair to assume that anyone that uses this seriously doesn't know how sequels in video games work anyway. Which would also make sense for the Zelda community, as we're all used to each game being new and fresh, as it reinvents the wheel, which was literally said in an interview. In reality, sequels to video games are usually incredibly similar to the original in the same types of ways that Tears of the Kingdom is similar to Breath of the Wild. Take Dead Space 2, which is one of my favorite games of all time, that's a sequel to Dead Space, also reuses a ton from the original game, and very noticeably so, yet it hasn't been complained about to any impressive measure at all. In fact, the reviews for Dead Space 2 are literally higher than the original. And before anyone mentions a reused map and how Dead Space didn't do that, other sequels also reused the map from the original game as well, which barely anyone complained about. And you could absolutely argue Tears of the Kingdom changed more about its map than those other games. Not to mention that it added 2 whole entire other layers to the map, which is very similar to what Spider-Man 2 did, yet no one compared anything about that. This doesn't mean or prove that Tears of the Kingdom's map is good, but it does refute the idea that the game is a glorified DLC. In reality, it's an imperfect but very well done direct sequel to a video game. And sequels like it have been made a million times before without nearly as much complaint, which is why it logically follows that Nintendo would take a similar path. Therefore, using the appeal that it's not as new as you wanted it to be, when they couldn't even upgrade the game technologically, doesn't conclude it would have made sense for them to have done it differently, as that would be a complete non sequitur. I, for some reason, made a really weird and nerdy analogy or comparison to Tears of the Kingdom using ethics and philosophy, which may be somewhat controversial. I tried not to give a one-sided view to what I'm saying, but I do think that the comparison does serve of some use. In ethics, utilitarianism is a theoretical system that proposes the idea that actions are morally right if they promote the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people, and vice versa. One argument you could make against this claim is that these two premises are contradictory, and this would be called the repugnant conclusion, which would be defined as so. You have one society with 1 million people at 100% happiness. If you could add specifically pre-existing people in other societies to yours to make the amount of people 2 million, but the happiness goes down 1% to 99, should you do that? If so, you've taken the good down a bit, but with a greater amount of people to compensate. The argument is attacking the idea that utilitarianism is a way to conclude if actions are morally wrong or right, since based on the premise I just gave, utilitarianism can't answer the question. A rebuttal to this could be that maybe the goal is just to have the highest average happiness among the amount of people in a society, which wouldn't seem like a bad idea. And although I just gave a really weird philosophical example, things like this work like this in real life all of the time. And it just so happens that Tears of the Kingdom is one of those things if you really think about it. And honestly, multiple other games like it. We want the most amount of ambition and the most amount of perfection, but it's impossible. In Tears, you could argue specifically that the game sacrificed too much perfection or quality for ambition. And just to clarify, the difference between sacrificing perfection for ambition and sacrificing quality for quantity is minor, but quantity in of itself isn't a good thing, without quality being present. Whereas even with perfection being absent, ambition, especially if it's a Zelda game, is even in of itself a good thing, if we're talking about games in the first place, as it's more of a broad term. You could consider smaller games like, let's say, Iron Lung, for example, perfect in everything that it's trying to do. It's not very ambitious with it being a shorter game, only one tiny area to move around in, yet it works perfectly. I would also grant that it's not inherently an ambitious game, but it's very possible that it could have been an ambitious project for the original creator, as it would definitely be even more so for someone like me. With this being said, assuming what I just said was granted, would you say that Iron Lung is a better game than Tears of the Kingdom? I'm sure some of you said yes, but the chances are exceptionally low. Suffice it to say, flaws in a game can be necessary if you're making a game like Tears of the Kingdom, as long as it can be averaged out, which is sort of the connection to the repugnant conclusion that I brought up. One good video that just recently came out on this subject is called Why the Best Games Are Kinda Bad by Rasputin. He dives a little deeper into this idea, but I thought it'd be worth mentioning, as it's practically impossible to be as ambitious and perfect as we were all expecting when it comes to games like Zelda. Based on what I just said, if someone doesn't like the game, the best argument they could give is that Tears of the Kingdom just sacrificed too much perfection or equality for ambition. Some may like that, and some may not. It's overall a hard thing to calculate in the first place. Regardless of if your memory currently of Tears is fond or not, there's absolutely multiple different impressive feats Tears has met that nowadays seems to get overlooked. What makes this game so special isn't the same factor that made Breath of the Wild special. I think it's fair to say a lot of people were expecting the similarity to be there, feeling the same amount of disappointment, which is definitely reasonable. I can, for example, praise this game technically for a decently long time, whether it's seamlessly falling through map layers, the size of the map itself, Ultra Hand existing and being consistent with the physics system, literally any other ability you get at the beginning of the game working flawlessly, better animations, arguably the best final boss out of any Zelda game to date, etc. The main point being that the many positives that you can name about Tears of the Kingdom are specifically specific to Tears of the Kingdom. A lot of them aren't shared. You can absolutely criticize, and I don't discourage it at all. In fact, I think a lot of the criticisms on YouTube are very helpful and make a ton of good points that aren't worth trying to refute because they are right. It's just that the common rhetoric is to act like those flaws ruined this game. At least that's what I've seen on the internet, as it feels like no one appreciates it anymore. I can't necessarily convince you to like it more. I think disliking it or not having fun with it is completely fine, and that happens to all of us with video games all the time. But that's not what I'm referring to. It has more to do with appreciating what the game did as much as depreciating it, or even more. If you think that your experience is that you had fun originally and then saw videos that change your mind or lessen your feelings for the game, I'd recommend replaying the game just to see what's really being criticized. I think for a lot of you, it will be better than you remember. It certainly was for me.